Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
Kansas Farmers Union, working to protect and enhance the economic interests and quality of life for family farmers, ranchers, and our rural communities. Learn more about our mission of education, cooperation, and legislative advocacy at kansasfarmersunion.org. Why should people care about the history of agriculture?
I think that one reason is to understand that the world wasn't always the way that it is now. And the systems that we have around us, which are complicated and global, are systems that we invented and came into being at a particular time in history. It was a super significant time. This was the time that the ice ages were finally over. And so that transition point, right? It wasn't like we had a chance to catch our breath, right? It wasn't like humans said, wow, the ice ages are gone. Let's live it up. No, they said, agriculture, we're going to get going. And so since that time, in a way, our species has been running, right? We've been growing our population. This is the fundamental aspect of all of written history. And it's possible because of this change in subsistence.
You are what you eat. It's a tired old saying. We probably heard one of our grandparents say it. But it's true. Our entire body is made out of the things we consume. So, what are we eating? And beyond that, where is it coming from? What's the history? What are the consequences of what we consume? Not just for our bodies, but for our minds. And beyond that, the planet. Because what we often forget is what we eat impacts the world around us. Our air, our water, our soil, our society. Every choice on our plates impacts the world around us in more ways than we often think. Agriculture is not just about growing crops and raising animals. It's about the environment we live in, the economy we rely on, and the future we create. So, let's dive a little deeper, shall we? This is Real Ag. What is agriculture?
Agriculture, I don't know. It's the area of
Agriculture is the
growing.
It's funny how difficult of a question this is. And I think it's because everything is agriculture. If there's one thing that learning about this word has taught me, it's just how far-reaching it is, and how it's affected every piece of our lives and every piece of our history. So, let's dive a little bit deeper. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old. Now, let's get a visual for that. Imagine the whole history of the Earth is represented by the Empire State Building, all 4.6 billion years. Humans have been around in our current form for about 250 to 300,000 years. That equals a postage stamp on the top of that Empire State Building. That's us, and not just modern human history, but the duration of human existence. A postage stamp on a tall building. Now, how long of that postage stamp is agriculture? How long have we been growing plants and raising animals so we have enough to eat? Well, it's widely believed that agriculture is about 10 to 15,000 years old. And it's tough to get an exact date on it because, as Michael Blake says,
the answer to this question is way, way more complex than any one date from any one part of the world. And that's partly because what we know about that past, when we go back 10, 15, 20,000 years ago, is so spotty that we really are looking at the picture with both eyes closed and maybe just the barest speck of light coming through. We don't have the real sweep of what happened.
More from him later. But back to this. We humans are that postage stamp on the top of the Empire State Building. And about 5% of that postage stamp is agriculture. That's how long we've been raising plants and animals for food. Pretty wild, huh? All of human existence right here. All of us farming our food right here. Kind of puts things in perspective. Now, we obviously can't fit 10 to 15,000 years of history into a 30-minute show. In fact, if every year of agriculture was just a second on screen, we'd still need over 4 hours to document the full 15,000 years. That's like watching one of those extended cut Lord of the Rings films. So instead, we're just going to go over some interesting highlights of this fascinating journey through our history. Starting with the Neolithic Revolution. So the Neolithic Revolution was the period that bridged the Paleolithic Age with the Neolithic Age. Back in the Paleolithic Age, we were all nomadic hunter-gatherers. This means we were all constantly on the move, hunting animals and gathering wild plants for food. As you can imagine, this was a lot of work, and you better not fall behind because if you do, you probably won't be around for long. Back in those days, we were forced to use simple tools like spears and arrows to catch animals and use your own knowledge of the landscape. There was also a lot of trial and error, as you can imagine. The only way to tell if something was going to kill you if you ate it was to eat it. Anyone want to guess which ones of these will kill you? Yeah. But because of this trial and error, hunter-gatherers had a vast knowledge of the natural world. They could identify the edible plants and how to properly track animals. This information was passed down for generations. Humans lived in small, mobile groups and followed the seasonal availability of the food sources, following packs of herd animals, eating the plants that hopefully wouldn't kill you, and every now and then tricking a mammoth to run off a cliff. Not exactly hitting the drive-thru. And that was the Paleolithic era. You're living in a world where your daily to-do list is basically 1. Find food, 2. Don't become food, and, if you haven't died yet, draw some cool stories on the cave wall. The original social media. No felt cute might delete later posts, more like, I killed this animal and I didn't die. It's a different world. But then came the Neolithic Age. Humans went from wandering around and finding food, like every other animal, and discovered that they could plant their own seeds and tame some of these herd animals, keeping everything in one place. This big change meant that people could build homes and live in bigger groups, even start towns. It was like from going camping every day to setting up a permanent home and garden.
In 10 generations, you have 1,024 ancestors. In 20 generations, you would have more than 1 million. In 30 generations, 1 billion. That's 1,000 millions. 40 generations is 1 million millions. That's 1 trillion possible lines of ancestry.
This is John Hawkes. John's an amazing anthropologist with a title I had to look up how to spell.
My title is, I'm the Vilas Borghese Distinguished Achievement Professor of Anthropology at the University of Wisconsin. What I am, I'm an anthropologist, I'm a professor, and I work at the University of Wisconsin.
I would also like to add to this list pretty much a modern-day Indiana Jones. John does some fascinating work. In fact, when we talked, he was actually working in a subterranean cave in South Africa, analyzing ancient human ancestors. But besides all of that, he's an amazing resource about the history of agriculture.
Agriculture and the innovation of domestication of plants and animals is one of the giant events that happened in our history. It had huge effects on the way that we live, the way we organize our societies. It also had huge effects on our biology. Our genes have been changing because we became agricultural as a species. And I got into it because of that element.
That's right. Agriculture has changed our genes.
I found that things had actually sped up. There's an acceleration of changes to our genome that is coincident with the origins of agriculture. And you can sort of today actually trace the particular genetic changes that make us better at things like digesting milk, resisting the pathogens that become really important when we're living in villages and become an agricultural species. There's different kinds of digestion in different places. Things like the sense of smell and taste that's changing because of the foods that we are adopting, right? That stuff is, one of the big influences on how we became human.
Like John said, a good example of one of these genetic changes is the ability to digest milk. You see, the ability to digest milk is a result of a genetic adaptation known as lactase persistence. Lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose, the sugar found in milk.
Yet here is no sissy drink. In the world of sport, milk is standard equipment. High in energy, tissue, and bone-building elements, milk is basic in the diet of every athlete.
In many mammals, including humans, or mammals, don't forget, the production of lactase decreases after weaning. However, in some human populations, a genetic mutation occurred that allowed for the continued production of lactase into adulthood. This mutation allowed the ability to digest lactose even after the typical weaning period. This adaptation arose in response to the practice of dairy farming and the consumption of milk products. But it's important to remember, not all populations had this adaptation. Lactase persistence is more common in populations with a history of dairy farming and milk consumption, mainly parts of Europe and some parts of Africa. In contrast, many people from regions where dairy farming was historically not practiced, like East Asia and the Native American population, often have lactose intolerance, a decreased ability to digest lactose.
It's a classic problem, right? In the 1950s, this was called lactose intolerance, and it was viewed as some kind of pathology. Like, this is, there's something wrong with people. It's the opposite, right? The people who can keep drinking milkshakes through their whole lives are mutants that didn't exist before 8,000 years ago, right? So it's totally backwards, the story.
Today, American women use milk for health and beauty, but they know how and why. They know that a clear skin, sound white teeth, attractive hair, lovely nails are impossible without enough calcium. And of all foods, milk is the richest source of calcium. And as for slenderness, well, just ask any Hollywood actress how she keeps her figure.
Well, I guess she's a mutant, just like a lot of us. And that's thanks to agriculture. But let's get back to this Neolithic revolution.
As people began to sort of use resources in a local area more intensively, that created the situation in which they were watching the maturation of seed plants. They were gathering more intensively seeds, and then they began planting them and cultivating sort of patches of them. And that caused evolution of these seed plants. The grains that we have today that we rely on, wheat is the big example, but corn, obviously, in Mesoamerica. These are grains that evolved in part under human influence. We created plants that didn't exist before. Corn is the biggest example of this, right? The wild ancestor of corn, teosinte, looks nothing like corn.
John's not lying. Look at this thing. Can you believe that this turned into this? Humans did this. Unbelievable.
We created this sort of really interesting plant because it had traits that worked well for the people that were domesticating it in Central and Central America and Mexico.
This is where Michael Blake comes back in. Michael knows the history of corn probably better than anybody. In fact, he wrote the book on the history of corn and its 9,000-year journey through societies.
The difference between teosinte, the ancestor of corn, and modern corn is that teosinte, much like all grasses that exist around the world today in the wild, have seeds that grow on the tips of their flowering stem, and the seeds are individual seeds that once ripened and eventually dry can fall off. They break away from the central stalk of the flower, and they disperse in the wild. All wild grasses have that in common, is that their seeds can naturally disperse. Well, if you've ever, and almost everybody has, eaten an ear of corn, you realize that all of the seeds in an ear of corn are trapped under this husk of leaves that's completely surround the main seed head of individual seeds, or all the many rows of seeds are all nicely protected by that group of leaves that encapsulate them, that we call the husk, that we have to peel away in order to eat our ear of corn.
So why does that matter? Who cares if corn now has this husk around it, right?
That can't survive in the wild. Corn, as we grow it today, is completely dependent on humans to peel away the husk that covers the seeds and dry those seeds out, and then eventually plant them and replant them.
That's right. Modern corn can't even survive without humans planting it. It's entirely lost its natural ability to reproduce. Raising the question, did we domesticate corn? Or did it just domesticate us? We're certainly doing the work it used to do for itself. The plant no longer has a natural reproductive mechanism, yet it's a staple crop of the whole world. How interesting.
These three crops, maize or corn, wheat, and rice, are the three grasses that power the economies of the world today. Without those three grasses, all coming from different parts of the world and all domesticated in somewhat similar ways, have totally transformed the way we humans exist on the earth. If those three plants were taken out of the equation today, there would be vast starvation and catastrophes around the world. If they all disappeared overnight, all of humanity would be in deep, deep trouble. In a sense, we've domesticated ourselves by becoming completely reliant on these grasses, just as these grasses are dependent on us now for their survival. So it's an interaction that we're completely bound up in, and we're pretty much stuck with for the foreseeable future.
Corn, wheat, and rice. Three grasses that changed everything. Funnily enough, all three of those can be made into liquor. Another wild grass that changed everything was sugarcane. We'll learn more about that in episode 3 of this season. And by the way, sugarcane is also another grass that can be turned into liquor. The lesson being, yep, it looks like it. And that's what's so interesting about agriculture. It's not just producing the stuff that we need to survive. It's producing all the other things that we just kind of want, like alcohol. In fact, in China, residue on pottery dating from around 7000 BC suggests the earliest alcoholic beverages. A mix of rice, honey, and fruit. And what's interesting about this is it predates the full-fledged cultivation of rice as a staple food crop in the region. Well, here we are with about 9 minutes left, and we've barely scratched the surface. So let's jump here. We've talked a bit about the domestication of plants. What about the domestication of animals? Well, to oversimplify it, long ago people noticed that certain wild animals were useful and easier to manage. You may have noticed we didn't go into breeding saber-toothed tigers to eat. We typically chose herd animals, and instead of hunting them, we began to tame and keep them close. We then began breeding them based on their different characteristics, and over time, this relationship grew, turning those wild creatures into the domesticated ones we recognize today. But I like how John puts it better.
I get to choose which males breed, and I'm going to choose the one that isn't mean, eating the mean ones, or castrating, right, most of them, and choosing the one that's going to be the father of the next generation, right? That's fundamental to breeding, and humans were doing that very early on. That's really what domesticating animals is about.
It's fascinating how these ideas that seem so big were figured out so long ago.
Yeah, this is the foundation of what we see as science today.
And that is all facts. Agriculture and its development has played a pivotal role in the advancement of science in so many ways. Plant breeding and genetics, obviously, like we've discussed, finding the more desirable traits and breeding them out. Also soil science, the need to understand soil fertility so that it can be improved and taken care of in order to grow better crops. Irrigation engineering, as civilizations got bigger because of agriculture, they had to grow more food. This meant we had to devise sophisticated irrigation systems to water all of this food. This led to so many advancements in engineering. Also, pest and disease management. The challenge of dealing with pests and diseases in agriculture spurred the research in biology, chemistry, and ecology, leading to a better understanding of the world around us. It also affected astronomy. As strange as it sounds, agriculture gave us a better idea about the stars.
Agricultural peoples, they had to predict things from the stars. They had to know when to plant. They had to know this, and they developed really detailed knowledge of Earth processes in the course of becoming agricultural.
That's so cool. So yeah, they're learning from the stars when to plant their seeds to be most effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. That's why when you have the adoption of agriculture in many parts of the world, think of Europe, where the early agriculturalists are building Stonehenge, right? They're making observatories, and that's because these cycles are such an intimate part of their life. Their existence becomes, really tied to the cycles.
As we've journeyed through this episode, we've seen that agriculture did more than just ground us to the earth. It lifted our eyes to the skies, laying the foundation for our understanding of space, time, and our place in the universe. A reminder that every discovery, every innovation, has layers of impact beyond what we can even think of at the time. But we're out of time for now. So let's have John put a bow on this episode the way only a Vilas Borghese achievement professor can.
When you look at the products that we use, of course, the staple crops that people think of, the wheat, corn, potatoes, right? These sorts of things, they're super important. That's what keeps us going. But what makes agriculture so interesting is that it's not just that. It's that we've brought all forms of human, I would say, interaction into our sphere, right? We're raising mind-altering substances, and they've become agricultural products. Chocolate is a mind-altering substance, and we farm it. Coffee, tea, right? I could talk about, in parts of the world where cocaine is also one of these, right? Coca leaves. Our biology did not get started with this system in place. This system has been changing our biology. We're having the effects of those changes today. And so one reason why it's important to understand that is to say that a lot of the things that we have that maybe don't feel right, or that don't work super well, are things that are here because we changed our lifestyle from our ancestors, and we're not real good at it yet.
This is just kind of like this fun little thing I do. It's going to be the most difficult for this episode because I'm asking you to kind of put 10 to 15,000 years of history into 3 words, but describe the history of agriculture in 3 words.
Oh man, that's a great question. 3 words. I guess the history is feed more people.
Bam! There's a soundbite right there.
That's it, right? Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
Because that's the constancy, right? It's like, man, we've got all these people around. Let's make sure that we plant enough for next year. That's human history, honestly.
We gotta feed more
in the simplest vein. Feed more people.
So what is agriculture? Yeah, it's just about everything. It's how we've built our society. It's how we've built our technology. It's how we feed more people. And as we get ready to feed the next generation of people, it might be a good time to take a second look at some of our agricultural practices. Because there have been some pretty big issues lately. The health and vitality of the soil beneath our feet, our relationship with the foods we eat and how they might affect our health, the economic policies that are affecting the people producing our food, the use of pesticides and what that might do to our health and the health of the food that we eat, how climate change might affect the protein that we consume in the next 20 to 25 years, and how the rising temperatures of a warming world might affect our relationship with water in the near future. We've got lots to figure out and lots to learn. And I hope you'll join us on this season of Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
Kansas Farmers Union, working to protect and enhance the economic interests and quality of life for family farmers, ranchers, and our rural communities. Learn more about our mission of education, cooperation, and legislative advocacy at kansasfarmersunion.org.